Hola, buenas tardes, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Gracias por acompañarnos esta tarde, a las personas que están esta tarde aquí vía Zoom y también a todas las personas que nos están acompañando eh, vía YouTube. Muchas gracias. Bienvenidas. Gracias por estar aquí. Vamos a dar un minuto, unos segundos para que se puedan conectar todas las personas. Les agradeceré que por favor mantengan su cámara apagada, por favor, y su micrófono también apagado para que podamos iniciar con esta presentación, con este webinar, por favor. Entonces vamos a dar un minutito más, nada más, unos segundos, para poder iniciar y poder presentarles a nuestro ponente de esta tarde. Entonces vamos a esperar. Y bueno, ya están conectando más personas. Ya tenemos más personas conectadas. Bueno, pues bienvenidos a todas y a todos. Muchas gracias por estar esta tarde aquí con nosotros. Eh, Le damos la bienvenida al doctor Kenneth Novak. Welcome, doctor Novak.
Gracias, Luis.
Bueno, está aquí con nosotros el autor de nuestro instrumento de evaluación, el perfil de estrés. Está editado por la editorial El Manual Moderno. Y bueno, tenemos para todos ustedes esta tarde el webinar titulado Uso e interpretación del perfil de estrés. Y bueno, no quiero dejar pasar un poco informarles respecto a lo que es la editorial del Manual Moderno brevemente, como es una costumbre en estos eventos. Pues bueno, Manual Moderno es una empresa socialmente responsable desde hace ya 12 años. Entonces, estamos comprometidos con la responsabilidad social y bueno, también les comentamos que Manuel Moderno tiene cobertura en toda Latinoamérica y España mediante nuestros distribuidores autorizados. Pueden visitar nuestra página web, en la cual encontrarán nuestro catálogo de libros físicos, electrónicos, de medicina, enfermería, odontología, nutrición, psicología y bueno, también nuestra área de divulgación, así como una vasta oferta de los instrumentos de evaluación psicológica. Y bueno, para no demorar más, pues quiero hablarles sobre el doctor. Quiero leer un poco de su currículum para que lo conozcamos. Y bueno, él es psicólogo, licenciado y director de investigación de Envicia Learning Inc. El doctor Novak obtuvo su doctorado en psicología del Consejo por la Universidad de California en Los Ángeles, en Estados Unidos, y ha publicado ampliamente en áreas de retroalimentación de 360 grados, evaluación, psicología de la salud y medicina conductual. El doctor Novak forma parte del consorcio de investigación sobre inteligencia emocional en las organizaciones de Daniel Goleman. Es editor saliente de la revista Consulting Psychology Journal de la APA y es miembro de la Asociación Americana de Psicología. Y bueno, pues sin más preámbulos y para dejarlos con el doctor Ken Novak, pues le doy la bienvenida. Thank you, Doctor. You're for joining us today in this webinar. Please go ahead with your presentation, please.
Gracias, Luis. Buenas tardes. I will be speaking slowly in English for those of you that may struggle. I have no command of the Spanish language, unfortunately, but very privileged to have you join me today and very happy to partner with Manuel Moderno to publish and distribute our stress profile, our validated psychological stress and wellness assessment that can be used for a wide variety of purposes, which I'll review. Today, my goal is to introduce new people to this particular assessment, and we will have time at the very end for questions. And I would like to spend my time with you today to review the scales that this particular assessment measures, which I think you will find quite important and quite timely, whether you are a therapist, a psychologist, a consultant, a coach, even a parent. You might find, again, this is a quite interesting tool, not to use with adolescents, but we have used it with college students in research. So thank you very much for joining me today. And I will be spending more time looking at both the scales and the development and research that is behind this particular tool. So please use the chat feature in this particular presentation to ask some questions, and we will save some time at the very end for me to answer those for you. So I appreciate the opportunity. I think all of us can agree that the world is quite stressful. Our work is quite stressful. Since COVID-19, which was a worldwide experiment that none of us signed up for to participate in, but all of us have experienced, we have learned a great deal about the mind and the body. And the particular tool that we'll be talking about today can be very helpful for a wide variety of purposes to explore with individuals and with groups and teams the current level of lifestyle habits and the particular stressors that they're experiencing, and some solutions that will help individuals cope more effectively with work and life stress. It is all predicated and based on the concept that we have evolved as humans, and our brain in particular is a survival brain. It is designed to do two things, and only two things at a very simplistic level. And one is to avoid harm and danger, whether it's very real work stress, toxicity in relationships, workload, family challenges, finances, or things that we imagine, how we talk to ourselves, how we cope. And our brain is also geared and designed to seek pleasure and to find hope and happiness. And this is how our brain has evolved over 300,000 years that humans have been on Earth. So I refer to this as our survival brain, and I won't speak to the physiology, the mind-body reactions that underlie each of the scales that the stress profile measures, but I certainly wanted to emphasize that it is based on our evolutionary stress and coping response. If we were to hear a very, very loud noise right now, wherever you're sitting and listening, your brain would prepare you to fight or flight. It is an evolutionary survival reaction to things we perceive that are either real or imagined. And it would take about a fifth of a second, a delay, before our neocortex, our thinking side of our brain, begins to analyze that noise. Is this truly a danger? Is this just something in the room that we're in where something fell, or a noise outside our office, or wherever you're listening to me today? So we talk about the brain as being more strongly reacting to avoiding pain and avoiding harm than it is actually to seeking joy and pleasure. And this is part of the evolution of why we react so strongly to harm and danger, why we react sometimes in a very reactive manner. And it takes quite a bit of energy for our brain to slow us down, to reverse the fight or flight, or what we call the stress response. So behind every one of the scales in this particular assessment is this sense of the brain from an evolutionary perspective. And I wanted to just introduce this as a background to how the design of this particular tool was developed in the 1990s. So this assessment has been around for many years with well over 20 years of research behind it. I won't spend time on this particular graphic. It comes out of a new book chapter that I will be publishing with a publisher called John Wiley. They're a big publisher of both tests and books next year as part of a series on stress. And this particular chapter of mine is on theories of resilience. How do we bounce back and how do we cope with work and life stressors that can cause physical harm, psychological distress, and even worsen health conditions. So again, I want to just put a context to this presentation to say that this topic is quite complex. And being a researcher for many years in this area, I continuously learn that some of our old studies are no longer relevant. Some of our findings from yesterday aren't ones we can duplicate today. So we keep evolving in the science of stress and the science of resilience and the science of coping, but you will find the stress profile very grounded in empirical or research that is up to date, and one that I'll point out has kept evolving with what we're learning that's brand new. The tool that some of you might have used, and if you're not, I would like to introduce this as an individual assessment. It is done either on a paper and pencil with a manual scoring key, or it could be done online, being given a particular link that you could access this tool. We have well over 20 years of research, and this particular assessment was designed to create a single instrument that we could measure 15 different factors that play an important role in how healthy you are and how healthy individuals you're working with are as well. To date, we have well over 125,000 working adults and some adolescents, some youth that have taken this instrument. So we have a very large normative database. It's also been translated into maybe 7 or 8 different languages and used globally. So we have an international use of this particular assessment, and there are a few other test publishers in different countries that are also distributing this particular assessment. But I am just privileged to work with Manuel Moderno over the last few years to bring this webinar and this instrument to all of you. I would like to say again that if you do take the online version or even go through the paper and pencil, it is very brief. It is 123 questions and will take no longer than 15 minutes to complete. And it is designed for individuals that are coaches, are trainers, are therapists, individuals working in human resources or working in wellness and health and well-being programs, whether it's in clinics or in companies today. So this is an excellent tool if you are a coach or a trainer or you work within an organization to consider using for stress management, for wellness programs, for other kinds of health programs that will be offered to employees or again in clinics to the public. So a very useful tool that has a wide reach of who could use it and for different purposes. It also has been used quite a bit for research. I know these pictures are very small and difficult to see, but these are academic publications in peer-reviewed, very prestigious journals in Mexico. And we also have many over 20 years in different countries. I just wanted to show you a couple of screenshots of some very recent research that's been done using this particular assessment. And I have one more screenshot to show you 3 additional studies. I just wanted to give you a sample. We could look through the internet and do a search of this use of this tool in Mexico and globally and populate many more slides, but I just wanted to give you a sense that this is not a new assessment. It has been around for a long time, but it might be new to you. And that is the purpose of today's webinar, is to give you an introduction of exactly what this tool is measuring and how to use it. One of the graphs that you will get if you take the online version, but you will also see these same results if you are using the manually scored version, is looking at 15 very specific scales. We call them psychosocial scales. These are scales that are highly correlated and predict how healthy people will cope and manage work and life stress to maintain resilience and maintain well-being. I will briefly today cover most but not all of these to give you a sense of what we're measuring and what it means to have a high or low score and how you might be able to use this particular assessment in coaching, in training, in therapy, or even if you're a researcher as I am, how to incorporate this particular tool in the research work that you're doing. So we use a particular scoring that is very universal. We compare the individual that completes this particular assessment to well over 125,000 individuals. And we use a particular type of standardized scoring that has the middle with the number 50. So if you can imagine a mountain or a picture of a bell curve, most individuals that would take this instrument would score between 40 and 60. That would be the middle of the bell curve or the mountain. And this is a way to compare scores on each of these scales to a very large population, a very large norm, to determine whether the scores on these scales are higher or lower. You'll notice a few of the scales on this particular slide have a different color, and they are colored red. And that means that a high score is actually not desirable. We would not like to have these particular scales with high scores. And I will share in more detail as we go through this what high and low scores on each of these scales really mean. But we could take, for example, the very first bar that has a red color, and this is a measure of work and life stress. And I will cover this in just a moment. But logically, we would not want somebody to have a high score on experiencing and perceiving a high level of stress. So the colors that you see here are those that we would like to see smaller or lower scores. The others, it would be desirable to have high scores. So let me cover each of these scales very rapidly and provide a little bit of research that I've done and others using this tool have done to give you some background as to why this is an important tool, particularly today, given how important stress and well-being really is. We measure two other things in this assessment. I'll be very brief about this. We do have a way of looking at whether people just answered questions randomly or whether they misread or were very careless. So we call this the unusual response index. There are 5 questions that we ask that seem very logical. And here's an example of one question which we would answer true or false. And the question is, I have never lied in my life. And of course, if you're honest, even if it is a small lie, we would all have to answer this question to be true. But if you answer false, it doesn't mean that you were careless. But if we see 3 or more of these particular questions that are different than this, we begin to question whether the results that have come over this particular assessment might have been misread. Perhaps somebody was very careless, or they answered randomly. They were just trying this out to be a test. So it's one of the things that we've built into this particular tool to give us an idea on the accuracy of results. And we just call this the unusual response index. It is not something that will be shown in the paper and pencil. It is shown in the paper and pencil report. Right now, we are not showing this in the online feedback report, but we may add this at a future date. So let me very quickly talk about each of the scales, again, ask some questions. And the very first scale that we measure is a measure of work and life stress. And we have 6 questions that are asked. And of course, as you think about work and life stress and measuring stress, it is quite complicated. And today, the most accurate way of measuring stress would be to have you perhaps put on a wristwatch or to wear a wearable that would give us instant input about your heart rate and perhaps your blood pressure and other metrics that are correlated with perceived stress. But in our assessment, we can't give you a watch or a tablet to wear or a jacket that is primed to measure your physiology. We ask you a series of questions over a 30-day or 1 month period. And this particular scale was derived on research many years ago on a tool called the Hassel's scale that was developed by very well-known stress researchers, mostly before many of you were born. But it looks at 6 areas, and we ask individuals to evaluate over the last 30 days the extent to which they report perceived stress in these 6 areas: their own health, whether there's stress within the family, whether you're experiencing work stress, whether it's overload or ambiguity or conflict with a jefe or a peer, whether there's social things that you're dealing with family and friends, whether it's financial stressors, or it could be things as increasingly we're watching today with the environment, tornadoes and floods and fires, and at least in California where I am, earthquakes. But are there other environmental hazards that are posing work and life stress? So this is a scale, as you would think logically, we would prefer lower scores. We would not like to see people with scores above 50, which is average. We would like to see scores much lower. So this is logical, and one of the scales that we have developed and measured, and it's highly correlated with health outcomes and work outcomes. Individuals, for example, that score very high on the stress scale also report clinical depression, or they will report in the world of work high job burnout, measured by the Maslow burnout inventory or alternative measures of job burnout. So we have 20 years of research indicating that this particular scale is very correlated with other paper and pencil and online measures of stress, such as the perceived stress scale, if you're familiar with that, and others. But more importantly, high scores are correlated with negative health and psychological well-being. So we've seen this over 20 years, a very good index, a very good measure of how individuals you're working with are experiencing work and life stress over the last 30 days. We also know that with stress, interpersonal interactions cause the fight or flight or the stress response to be more reactive. You may have heavy workload. You may be attending this webinar and go back to your email and find you have 15 or 20 new emails. This might create some tension or anxiety of trying to go through all of your emails. But interpersonal interactions, conflict, having a very toxic interaction with a colleague, a peer, a customer, a patient if you're working clinically, causes the physiological fight or flight response. And what's mediated by this is a peptide called cortisol. And cortisol is elevated when we're all experiencing work and life stress, but with interpersonal interactions that create stress, it remains elevated quite a bit longer. So this is some of the work that we do outside of using this tool as an organizational and occupational psychologist. We do quite a bit with leaders and employees, and we do find that a lot of tension, a lot of conflict creates a perception of work and life stress. How the jefe, how leaders behave can directly impact people's well-being and their health over time. So I wanted to point out that there are different ways to measure stress and different ways of looking at the impact of stress, but interpersonal stress is quite interesting in its severe impact on creating and sustaining a fight or flight response much longer than just workload or other types of scheduling and non-interpersonal stressors. I won't go into any detail, but we certainly know that stress from an evolutionary perspective is not bad. In fact, it is designed in our body as a survival mechanism to make sure that we can fight if we need to, if it's realistic and it's required today, or we could flee, we could run away from harm or danger. And from an evolutionary perspective, thousands of years ago, this is, in fact, from an evolutionary perspective, quite advantageous if we were to be approached by a tiger or a bear to run away and to create in our body the ability to focus our attention and our resources at a physiological level to make sure we survive. And of course, today it's very rare to be attacked by a bear or a tiger. Today's stressors are things like workload and difficult individuals at work and at home and financial pressures and losing our job and other types of things that monetarily stress us. But the point I want to make of this slide is that chronic stress, holding on and having stress day in and day out, is in fact harmful to our health. And we can actually take a look at your blood today and measure the DNA that you have to get a metric, a measure of how much damage work and life stress or traumatic events have created and caused damage to our body. And there are these what we call end caps, the very ends of our DNA that have a particular name called telomeres. And the best analogy I can give you is if you have a pair of shoes that you would tie laces together. Many people have slip-on shoes today or Velcro, but if you recall and have shoes where you actually tie laces, you will notice at the end of your laces are very small plastic caps. And these plastic caps hold the shoelace at the very end and allow you to tie your shoelaces effectively. So this is a very strong analogy of what telomeres are. These are the end caps of DNA. And if you wear shoes for a long time, you will notice that these plastic end caps become brittle, they become damaged, and the shoelace actually becomes to be released and is fraying. And sometimes those plastic caps break altogether. So this is what we're able to see at a cellular level, pulling some of your blood to look at the damage. How old are these shoes? How old are the shoelaces? And I want to again suggest that stress in and of itself is not bad, but ongoing chronic stress is very damaging, causing wear and tear, if you will, to the mind and body. So this is why the one scale that we're measuring in the stress profile is quite powerful. It is self-report, but again, highly correlated with the physiology that we've measured and researched on objective stressors that occur. I want to point out that when we look at predicting how long any of us will live, there are many factors, and all of these factors are very important. Genetically, some of you might be prone to high blood pressure or high cholesterol, or be prone to diabetes or cancer, or even cardiovascular disease. But this is not a life sentence, and we find, you'll see what's bolded, is that our predictions of how healthy and how long we can live and be well is related to practices of what we elect to do each day, both mentally, spiritually, physically, and psychologically. And so this particular tool, the stress profile, is measuring very important behavior and lifestyle habits. And if you are a wellness coach or working in programs and corporations and organizations to help employees stay healthy, we can foster and support healthy lifestyle practices. So I want to share with you what we are measuring in the stress profile. And we do have a global or a cumulative or an overall measure of health habits. And this is composed of 25 questions. I'll be very brief to cover each of these very quickly, but we do have a big picture result that you can look at with your clients or your employees or the individuals you're working with to get a big picture on, are their health habits positive, neutral, or negative? And if they are neutral or negative, we would then look at the individual scales that we see here to provide coaching or training or different wellness and health programs. One of the things that we do measure is the behaviors that underlie health habits. I won't go into too much detail here, but over 25 years, as you would predict, we continuously find new research that changes. And so when we originally designed 20 plus years ago this particular tool, we believed, based on the research of that day, that taking an aspirin or a baby aspirin would be cardioprotective, meaning that this would be beneficial for helping individuals who have not had a heart attack or those that have experienced a heart attack to prevent future cardiac events. We no longer have evidence that this particular behavior is true. And so in our current use of this particular tool, we don't score this particular question. We also had a question, and we still do, on caffeine consumption related mostly to coffee and perhaps caffeinated beverages. And again, older research has suggested this was deleterious. This was negative and related to hypertension and high blood pressure. And today we have found just the opposite, that drinking caffeinated beverages, particularly coffee, is cardioprotective. And up to a limit of a couple of drinks of coffee or caffeinated tea a day, this may actually be beneficial. So this is a second question that we no longer score in the overall health habit scale. And I point this out only to suggest that when we measure these types of very complicated behaviors, new research every day will give us new information about what we've learned in the past and how that may be very different from what we learn in the future. So for those of you that are interested, I can share more offline if you want to email me. We also have a measure, if you will, of physical activity or exercise. And we measure in our particular tool 3 different types of exercise. Some are aerobic. Examples might be walking or running or taking a bicycle spin class. Some are anaerobic. It could be, again, things like stretching, Tai Chi, weight training, or just leisure activities that keep us moving. So we would like to have, and we find in our research, a higher score on all of these is very beneficial. And certainly we know that physical activity not only has cardiovascular and health positive impact, but it also strongly impacts our cognitive functioning, particularly as we get older. So we do see a very strong research relationship that's what we call dose related, meaning the more you do, being reasonable about exercise, the greater the benefit. And there's quite a number of research studies that suggest that physical activity in your capability zone is also very beneficial for preventing cognitive decline. And I won't go into detail as to why, but as we exercise, we release in the brain a particular, I'll call it a fertilizer, that helps neurons to continuously connect with each other and to ensure that our cognitive activity level is quite high. So intuitively, we always encourage, as you would expect, physical activity and exercise as being very, very beneficial. We also have a very important scale, and we're finding increasingly that lack of sleep is predictive of not only negative health, but obviously our interpersonal relationships and our ability to stay healthy. So we are measuring in this particular assessment both the quality and the quantity of sleep at night and the ability to find time to get adequate napping and sleep. And again, this is a scale we would ideally like to see people score high on. And obviously, the negative implications are very widespread, that poor sleep is going to be impacting one's health. We don't try to provide any diagnostic information. We don't predict whether somebody has clinical insomnia or any type of sleep disorders, of which there's many, but it may give you information to make a referral to a physician, a sleep center, or a sleep expert for clients and individuals or employees that are struggling with sleep. I wish we had more time to share more about this important topic of sleep, but we do know that most of us are getting adequate rest and sleep, but we certainly know that individuals that get very few hours of sleep or disturbed sleep have a very high risk for cardiovascular and other types of negative health and well-being impacts. And certainly all of us, when we go to bed tonight, we will have an architecture, if you have normal and healthy sleep, of going through lighter stages of sleep to deeper stages of sleep. And that will occur in the first 90 minutes, the first hour and a half that your head will hit the pillow. And after about a 90-minute period, each of us, if you're still sleeping, will have our first dream period. And this is referred to as rapid eye movement sleep. It is an interesting period of sleep where our body physically is paralyzed, so we don't act out or can, in fact, do things while our brain is very active. And you'll notice as we would sleep 6, 7, or 8 hours a night, we will have less deep sleep and an increase in dream periods. And that corresponds if you wake up and early in the morning after a dream, you will be able to recall, for most of us, what the content or some of the content of that dream was. This architecture is very different for infants and for youth, for teenagers who require more sleep and actually have a biological rhythm of keeping them up later at night and finding it very difficult to be awake and alert early in the morning. And this is in contrast to many schools worldwide that require students to go to school quite early to begin their classes and their courses. But the brain is really not evolved from a maturity level for young adults to, in fact, be optimized for concentrating and doing schoolwork. So we find a struggle with parents and school systems to start earlier than the brain really requires young adults. This architecture is also very different if you are over 50 or 60 years of age. We will find less of the deep sleep and much more of what we call fractured sleep. So this is an interesting topic that we don't go into in detail with the stress profile, but one that is very important, that if you're using this tool and speaking with your clients about sleep, and they tell you that they are struggling with sleep, we will find that even a few hours less sleep than each of us that are listening to me need during the day will impair your ability to do things such as concentrate, effectively be caring and sensitive to other people. And if you like doing gaming, or if you are driving a car or flying an airplane, we find that actually your performance is impaired even if you believe you're doing quite well. So lack of sleep is very critical to our health, our performance if you're in an organization, and our overall well-being. I have one of very few published academic studies that show that leaders, jefes, that get inadequate rest and sleep at night are perceived by others as lacking social sensitivity, lacking emotional and social competence, lacking emotional intelligence. I don't think we need an academic research study to tell everybody listening today that when you do not get the rest and sleep that you would like to have, that you are optimized for your performance, and you can relate to other people in the same supportive, caring, and collaborative fashion. So a very important scale that we measure in the stress profile. I won't go into this slide, but we certainly know that, as I've pointed out, lack of sleep impacts people at work and impacts people outside of work with their health and well-being. Very important topic. We also measure in the scale of stress profile eating and nutrition. We're measuring what we consider heart healthy behaviors. We don't judge or evaluate diets. We are looking at things that we know from evidence-based research protect people from diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So we would like people on average to have higher scores than lower scores on this particular measure. And of course, eating and nutrition habits are quite controversial in terms of what diets are preferred. And certainly today, worldwide, we are beginning to see the advent of new pharmaceutical treatments for overweight, for weight management, for diabetes, that are becoming very popular as ways of controlling the physiology of how hungry I am, how we metabolize food that we eat, and the ability for actually losing weight to be protective for long-term health. But we do have a measure if you're knowledgeable and have training in dietetics and eating and nutrition to provide some information back to you about how individuals taking the stress profile are reporting their eating and nutrition habits. It's quite interesting. One of the other scales that we're finding are so important and is a very strong predictor of longevity and mortality. And because humans have evolved to be social creatures, we rely on others to take care of us when we're very small infants, and we rely on others as we grow older to have others to support and help us cognitively, physically, emotionally. So we measure social support in this particular tool with 18 questions. We measure three things. We measure, is there a perception that you have people at work and away from work, in your family, with friends, if you're in a partnership, a romantic partnership, a supportive partnership, do you perceive that they exist for you? If they do, we ask a second question, which is, do you utilize? Are you tapping into and relying on these resources for instrumental support, emotional support, providing input, and just providing spiritual support for you? And finally, we ask a question overall in each of these particular areas. Are you satisfied with the support that you're receiving at work from your immediate boss or supervisor, from your colleagues at work, from family members or relatives, from your social support network of friends? And again, if you have a partnership in life, are you satisfied with the quality? And we are finding in our research, as we know with social support, that this is a very strong predictor of health and well-being. So we're measuring this very carefully. This is a very interesting scale, but one that we're finding increasingly very strongly is related to overall health. And during stress, we know from our own personal experiences who we can turn to, who we can rely upon, who is there for us, makes a very big difference of how much stress we're experiencing and how well we can cope with that stress. At least in the United States, it wouldn't be much different. Mexico or anywhere else in the world, we find that lacking social support, being alone, being lonely, and not having meaningful individuals in our life is in fact a health risk. So this is another reason that in this particular instrument, it gives you, if you're using it with your clients, with employees, opportunities to explore social relationships, conflict people may be having, and ways to form and sustain relationships over time. A very strong predictor of health and well-being, very strong predictor of how long all of us will live. And if you don't believe me, there's a famous song by one of the Beatles, the group Sir Paul McCartney, who wrote in one of his lyrics a wonderful quote that might be interesting to see how it translates, but he says, "In the end of life, the love that we take from each other is equal to the love that we make." So we find at the end of the day, with life, what is truly meaningful is family and friends and the social connections that we have. It is not about the money. It is not about our possessions. It truly has a lot to do with the human essence of being with people we value, we care about, and having that reciprocated. That is a very important predictor of our health and well-being. We also measure a very interesting and older concept. We call it type A behavior. And today we probably believe that this is a concept that is a little old, but we still measure two things. We call them factors, if you will, in the 10 questions that we're asking. And one of these is, in fact, very predictive of health and well-being. And these are individuals who get quite impatient. They get very annoyed with other individuals. And these are people when they are driving in a car, if somebody interrupts and cuts them off or drives very crazy, they react emotionally. They will yell, they will honk their horn. These are individuals who will go to an elevator in an office building, and all elevators have two symbols. One is an up and one is a down symbol. even if it is lit up, even if it is pressed, they will compulsively keep pushing these buttons. They are impatient. These are individuals that will go to a grocery store, a market, and if there's a special line for self-checkout or a line that has a limit for just a few items, they will be the people that will be counting how many items people are bringing to the grocery market for that line. So they get very upset. They get very irritated and annoyed when things are too slow, when things are moving at a pace that is upsetting. And these are also individuals, as a positive to this, that are very driven. They're very achievement oriented. They're very competitive. They work very hard to win at all costs. And we do find that some of these individuals, both today and yesterday, were at risk for high blood pressure and potential cardiac reactions. So although it's an old concept, the behaviors that underlie type A behavior, we ideally would like to have a lower score. So this is one of those scales that I showed you earlier that has a red bar, meaning high scores are not really desirable. We would want to teach these individuals things like mindfulness meditation, learning to change their self-talk. I'll talk more about that in a moment, and to reframe, to reappraise what is occurring so that their fight or flight, the physiology of the stress response, slows down or is reversed. So this is type A behavior. Again, a pretty interesting scale that we measure with 10 questions. We also look at a very fascinating cognitive approach. What do we say to ourselves when we experience stress? This has a fancy phrase called cognitive hardiness, but it is measuring four things that are very critical for reducing the fight or flight response, taking our foot off the accelerator of the fight or flight response. And one of those is viewing things in our life that are different, that are changing, and viewing it through a lens of being a challenge rather than being negative and being a threat. And if you can reappraise, if you can view things through this lens of, I didn't ask to be laid off from my job, I didn't ask to have something I didn't count on unexpectedly occur. If we can look at this now as what is the blessing, what is the advantage, rather than feeling threatened by it, we find our physiology is reversed. We also find that when people enjoy and love and have a passion for what they do, the little stresses that we all experience are not magnified. But when we're unhappy with our job, when we're unhappy with a colleague, a peer, a relative, a loved one, every little thing is magnified and creates a fight or flight response reaction that's quite strong. We also know that if we feel as if we can control our fate, we can have an impact on the future, things that occur to us are less stressful than if we believe everything is due to luck or fate or just the will of God, and we can't do anything about it. So having mastery, having the ability to cope, lessens the impact. And finally, when we feel we can explain things in a positive manner, that won't be permanent, we again find that our mindset, our approach to viewing work and life stress can be very protective. So we have 30 questions we ask, and a high score are individuals who are insulated. They don't react with the same fight or flight intensity or stress response than those that are low in this particular scale. And again, if you're working with individuals from a counseling, a therapy, a coaching perspective, we find cognitive behavioral techniques, relaxation, meditation. These are things that can really help people put on a new lens of looking at the world. We can't change the event, but we can change our perception and we can change what we say to ourselves. And you'll see that we measure this in very particular ways in just a moment. So we call this cognitive hardiness. A high score would be very desirable, and we would like to facilitate and enhance this in our individuals. And I won't go into any details. We have quite a bit of research with this particular scale showing that it's very predictive of self-report and physiological and objective outcomes, both at work and away from work. And I like this quote. It basically says people that are cognitively hardy have a mindset that things will turn out best for those who make the very best of how things turn out. How you look at the world will change your reaction to it, even though the event remains the same. It's a very important scale. I'm going to skip that and also say that the next four scales give us information about what we say to ourselves in a typical fashion. When a stress occurs, when a life event occurs, when an interaction occurs, we all have very characteristic habits of how we go about talking to ourselves. So we measure four particular coping techniques. We call these trait techniques, meaning it's a generic way of explaining how, in general, you will tend to cope with work and life stress. And of course, every situation, every interaction might be very different, but these are tendencies that we find with individuals. We could, in fact, look at things from the positive or the bright side when things occur. We call this positive appraisal. We could, in fact, think about the worst thing that will occur and dwell and ruminate and worry about things that are bothering us. This is called negative appraisal. And as I mentioned with cognitive hardiness, we can work actively to frame things, to reappraise, to use different language, to say this is annoying, but it is not a catastrophe. And just by labeling our emotions or the event, we can change not the event, but our reaction to it. And finally, we can cope with work and life by taking actions, by speaking up, by changing our behavior, changing our location. If traffic is terrible on the freeway and it's very stressful, most of the time we have an option to find a problem-oriented solution, to find a different route, to get off the freeway, to go and take a break if we are unable to get around that traffic. This is the problem solving that we bring. So all of these are desirable except for negative appraisal. We would not want an individual to have a high score, and we do find in our research that individuals with high scores on negative appraisal also report higher levels of clinical depression. So the self-talk of the worst thing will occur, I'm not very good as a person, I will never amount to anything, these things always happen to me. Those types of self-talk statements increase our chronic fight or flight response, leading to inflammation and chronic stress. So these are the four scales that we measure. We call them coping styles. And one of the last scales that we measure is a label called psychological well-being. And we measure both your sense of day-to-day work and life satisfaction, the kind of the ratio of are things more positive than negative. And we find that individuals with a high score on psychological well-being, 12 questions, tend to see each day in a very positive light of gratitude and joy and purpose. And certainly it's a measure of happiness and work and life satisfaction from an overall perspective. So a very important scale. And again, we have a combination in our psychological well-being of these concepts of, are you overall happy with work and life? Do you experience more positive emotions than negative? And do you have a sense of having meaning and purpose, and our relationships in general more positive than negative? So this is what we're measuring with our particular scale called psychological well-being. I'm going to skip a few of these slides and suggest again that if you are new to using the stress profile, we would want to use the report and the feedback to categorize what might be individuals at work and away from work doing really well with lifestyle habits and their level of stress that we can reinforce, that we could encourage them to continue to practice, and what might be areas of risk that as a coach, a wellness coach, as a leader, as a stress management expert, as a therapist, what could we do to help individuals work on and manage these aspects of their scales that come out very high or low on this particular tool to put together a stress management, a wellness, and a health management plan to insulate them to be as healthy as possible. And of course, if you have used this particular tool, you know that we would sit down typically with an individual and hold a confidential individual meeting, a debrief, to allow the individual to reflect on what they're doing well so they can continue to leverage those desirable and positive lifestyle practices, health practices, and to come up with a plan. What kinds of things could they do more or less or differently? Eating better, more physical activity, creating and learning how to manage conflict in interpersonal relationships, practicing things like mindfulness meditation and other kinds of stress management techniques, and to put those into action and to come back at a later point if you are a wellness coach or lifestyle coach or somebody in a wellness program in a corporation, we would then look at some way to evaluate, are people healthier physically and psychologically, or are there metrics that we could measure such as absenteeism or healthcare costs or other kinds of indicators that our program and our individual work with our clients has improved their physical health and well-being. So this is part of what the stress profile is designed to do, is to give a snapshot of 15 different scales and to help people do more, do less, do things differently that will promote obviously being healthy physically, spiritually, psychologically, and from a well-being perspective, and helping them to put together a development plan. So I'd like to stop with my presentation on the stress profile. And I am very open. Luis, I could stop the sharing of my slides. We could discuss and try to answer any questions you might have. But if you don't have any, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. And I hope if you haven't tried the stress profile, you will contact Luis and his team at this particular wonderful test publisher and to try it out with an employee, with a team, with an organization. Again, if you're a researcher, to incorporate one or more of these scales into your work. So again, I want to thank all of you for your participation. Louise, I will turn it back over to you to see if there are questions in the chat. And I'm going to stop sharing my slides for the moment. We could go back to it if we need to.
Okay, doctor, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. We will now move on the questions. Entonces, si hay alguna persona, alguien que tenga alguna pregunta en este momento, les agradeceremos que, por favor, nos escriban en el chat si existe alguna pregunta o en su defecto, también si hay alguien que quiera abrir su micrófono con todo gusto. Entonces, vamos a esperar un minuto para ver si alguien tiene alguna pregunta, algún cuestionamiento, aprovechando que tenemos aquí con nosotros al doctor Novak. Entonces, vamos a dar un momento para ver si hay alguien que tenga alguna duda o si es que quedó algo. Okay, doctor, the question is in chat.
Let me see if I can grab that. If not, Luis, if it's in Espanol, you can help translate it. If it's in English, let me see if I can read it. So feel free if I'm seeing some that are in Spanish that I'm not sure. I see one question is, to what extent can this assessment be used? Is it only for clinical or therapeutic use? So thank you, Gracias, for this question. We actually see this tool as better for work in organizations to help with employee stress management programs or well-being programs if they're offering these to employees. If you are an executive coach or a trainer in human resources, this tool could be very useful for a webinar or to do individual coaching to help a leader or a non-leader to work on their health and to cope more with work and life integration or work and life balance that is so important today. Since COVID, we have more people that are complaining their level of work stress is very high. And if you're a parent, you have another layer of stress in trying to balance taking care of your children. If you are living with or have nearby elderly parents, we have another layer of stress that you have to manage of helping them to be as healthy and happy as they can. So we don't see this as a clinical or therapeutic tool as much as we see this as a well-being instrument that can be used in human resources, in coaching, in training, and again, organizational wellness programs. So thank you for your question. I hope I have answered that for you.
Thank you, doctor, for your response.
If you want to translate, Luis, and I'm sure you can make it shorter, please do so for those that don't have a very good English language.
Okay, doctor.
La respuesta en resumen del doctor con respecto a si, además de los entornos clínicos y terapéuticos, él ve alguna utilidad fuera de estos contextos y responde que efectivamente se ha visto una gran utilidad en entornos laborales. Miden el nivel de estrés y han visto buenos resultados ya con coaching y acompañamiento de los individuos que resultan altos en ciertos constructos, en ciertas subpruebas y escalas, y lo recomienda mucho para entornos laborales.
Ok, muchas gracias, Rocío. Gracias por
Yeah,
la
probably better
información.
than I answered, so gracias.
Gracias, gracias, Rocío. Gracias, doctor, por por la respuesta a la pregunta y gracias, Rocío, por la aclaración, por la traducción. Y bueno, no sé si haya alguien más que tenga alguna pregunta para el doctor. Si quieren. Eh,
Okay, Ana Maria is have a question and she congratulates you about the presentation and she has a doubt about the actualization or maybe a new version of the profile stress.
Gracias, Ana Maria. The instrument has remained for 20 plus years the same, but as I mentioned, we continuously review current research and specific questions may be revised or eliminated in the scoring. But we have seen with this particular instrument stability in the science of these lifestyle practices and behaviors that have lasted a very long time. So right now there is no revision, there is no another edition, but we will obviously continuously monitor the research that comes out to see if any particular lifestyle practices or behaviors, the way that we are scoring these do change, such as caffeine use, the use of aspirin, that we now know are very different than they were 25 years ago. So no other versions are planned, no other revisions are necessary right now.
Gracias, doctor. Bueno, en resumen, el doctor comenta que de momento no está considerada alguna actualización. Desde su perspectiva, no hay un cambio en el contexto social, cultural que lo amerite. Habría algo, a lo mejor algunas preguntas que habría que eliminar del cuestionario, pero no tanto actualizar la prueba. Específicamente menciona acerca del uso de la cafeína y la aspirina, que tal vez ya no tienen el mismo uso que hace 25 años, pero de momento no habría una actualización.
de acuerdo, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, doctor. Thank you, doctor. Gracias, Rocío, por la traducción y la aclaración. Y bueno, si hubiera alguien más que tenga alguna pregunta, algún comentario, estamos al pendiente. Ok, creo que todo quedó muy claro. Y bueno, creo que ya no hay más preguntas. Everything was very clear. And well, I think there are no more questions, doctor.
Okay, it's time for siesta.
Okay. No,
There is another
Okay.
comment in the chat.
Perhaps, Luisa or Rocío, you could translate this as well, and I will try to be very brief. A very, very good question with a very difficult way to answer, but maybe you could pose the question in Espanol for anybody that has trouble reading this, and I will try to answer.
okay. O sea, lo que entiendo es que él está viendo las preguntas en español.
No, the question is in English, no?
Yes.
Ye-
Don't worry, we will write it on the chat right
Okay,
now in Spanish.
very good. We know in the research literature that there is a very strong correlation between stress, how we measure stress, and depression. And we have found in 20 years of research that our stress measures in this tool, the scale of stress, the scale of sleep, the scale of psychological well-being, and the scale of negative appraisal, when each of those are in a desirable direction, we find very little reporting of clinical depression, but logically, those are all the symptoms clinically of people that are depressed. So we do not measure in the stress profile depression directly, but if you are using this tool and you see elevated stress, elevated negative appraisal, poor sleep, and very low psychological well-being, it gives you a hint and a suggestion that this is an individual that may need additional counseling or therapy or referral for possible depression. There is nothing within the stress profile that we measure that gives you a sense of predicting suicide ideology or predicting who might be prone or likely to suicide. That is a very different topic and one that, again, is much more clinical than the intention of this particular assessment was designed to provide an individual or a clinician or a researcher or a human resource practitioner information about. So we do not in any way attempt to measure suicide ideation or any predictions about suicide. We do, of course, have very high correlations with anxiety and depression and also job burnout that we find with this tool. So thank you for a very good question. I hope that has been helpful as an answer.
Thank you, doctor. Bueno, preguntaban en el chat la opinión del doctor sobre las implicaciones del estrés, la correlación con la ansiedad y la depresión, la prevención del suicidio. Y relacionado a la herramienta, el doctor comenta pues que la herramienta va enfocada hacia síntomas clínicos que pudieran estar asociados a la depresión, a la ansiedad, pero no necesariamente se puede utilizar como una herramienta diagnóstica. Que claramente estos son señales nada más, que se tienen que hacer otro tipo de evaluaciones y que tampoco se vuelve entonces un predictor de ideación suicida o de todo este tipo de cuestiones, que más bien va enfocado a otro tipo de contextos. Y me parece que por ahí faltó por parte del doctor la respuesta de los contextos de trabajo, pero bueno, creo que ya quedó aclarada esa parte en una pregunta anterior.
Ok, de acuerdo. Muchas gracias, doctor. Gracias, Rocío, por la traducción. Y veamos si hay alguien más que tenga alguna pregunta. Gracias a Jason Moreno por su pregunta, a Ana María, a Daniel Gutiérrez. Y bueno, no sé si hay alguien más que tenga alguna pregunta. Damos un minuto más. Ok, buenas tardes a todos. Agradecerle al doctor Novak por su presentación, muy interesante. ¿Qué otros países se ha validado el instrumento y sería posible validar en las ciudades colombianas?
Okay, Sarah is asking if there are another countries that with validation for this instrument,
Yes.
and if
Yeah.
it will be possible to validate it in Colombian cities.
We have strong validation in many countries. The tool has been translated outside of Mexico, in Greece, in Italian, in German, Danish. So we have global research, and certainly by purchasing and using this particular tool from Manuel Moderno, you have an opportunity to use this within your respective countries for research and for practice. I think, like we have seen in every country, the correlations, the associations between the various scales tend to be very, very robust, meaning it's equal in any country, any culture. Stress, whether you're in Colombia, whether you're in Canada, whether you're in Italy, whether you're in Afghanistan, creates a mind-body reaction that can be impacting our mind and body, our well-being. So we're not finding a lot of cross-cultural differences. We certainly do find some differences in lifestyle practices. We have very specific questions on smoking and use of alcohol. We do find differences by country. But again, if we are abusing those things, smoking too many cigarettes or cigars, drinking too much, we find, independent of what country we're in, these impact negatively on our well-being and our long-term health. So certainly it can be used in any country and has been used in at least a dozen or more countries worldwide over the last 20 years.
De acuerdo, pues de acuerdo a la pregunta que nos hace Sara, no está validado en Colombia, sin embargo, digamos de forma oficial, pero sí se ha utilizado en varios países para investigación y para otro tipo de aplicaciones, en Grecia, en Italia, en Alemania, y de hecho la herramienta fue hecha con investigación de carácter mundial o global. Entonces, tal vez no sería necesario porque no han encontrado una diferencia significativa en las poblaciones, al menos en que tenga que ver en los últimos 20 años. Y esto no lo dijo el doctor, lo decimos de manual moderno. También invito a todos el doctor, a los que nos acompañen de otros países. Él está abierto a colaborar con quienes quieran realizar una investigación con el instrumento. Sería que se pongan de acuerdo, más bien que nos escriban a nosotros para ver de qué forma podemos contribuir con sus investigaciones. I'm sorry, doctor. I talk about a proposal for research of the instrument. That was extra.
Okay, gracias.
Ok, muchas gracias, Rocío. Gracias, doctor, por la respuesta. Y bueno, si hay alguien más. Ok, quieren el contacto del doctor en caso de querer generar temas de investigación.
Doctor, I don't know if you can share your email for research topics.
Yes, let me go back to. If you can see my screen on the left-hand side, you will see my email address. You can contact me directly with research questions or additional follow-up. For ordering this particular tool, contact Luis, and the team at Manuel Moderno for information on acquiring either the paper and pencil booklets and materials or perhaps the online administration if that is what you would like to do.
Sí, muchas gracias. Sí, como menciona el doctor, estamos a la orden. Igual también, si quieren escribirnos de este lado, con mucho gusto los podemos ayudar. Y bueno, creo que fueron. Sí, muchas gracias. Nos podrían regalar el contacto en caso de querer generar más temas de investigación. Bueno, aquí ya está. Ya colocaron los dos correos, el del doctor y el mío. Entonces, bueno, creo que, bueno, vamos a esperar un momento más si alguien está redactando alguna pregunta. Bueno, ok, creo que ya no hay más preguntas. Entonces, lo que le pediríamos al doctor es que nos dé un mensaje final. Dr. Ken, do you have any final message to end the webinar?
I would just encourage everyone to think about managing stress in a healthy way, and that sometimes the things that are very alarming and catastrophic in our life are ones that are very human. And I appreciate today the opportunity to be with you. And if you do find this assessment tool of value in helping anybody to live life with less stress in a more healthy manner, that would be my wish. So gracias. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Rocio, for the opportunity to be with all of you today.
Thank you, doctor, y gracias a todos por acompañarnos.
Sí, muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos, por su tiempo. Thank you very much, doctor, for your time. I hope we can do more presentation like this. Muchas gracias a todos y muy buena tarde. Goodbye, doctor. Thank you.
Gracias, adiós.
Gracias, hasta luego.
Gracias a ustedes.